Alright guys, got a video here for you today on the Airmaks Krait, and in this one what we're going to be doing is a full disassembly of the rifle, followed by just a brief overview of the plans that we have for it. With that said, the first thing that we need to do is make sure the rifle is unloaded by removing the magazine, then firing the rifle in a nice safe direction with a backstop to make sure that there's not a pellet in the breech. Once that's done, we can loosen this screw here, which is the bleed screw for the regulator. So I've already done it on my rifle, but by using a 3mm Allen key in this grub screw here, you can crack it loose about a turn, and that should bleed all the air out the rifle. Once the rifle has stopped hissing, what you need to do is just fire the rifle in a nice safe direction again to make sure that there's no air left inside the plenum. This bleed screw here is situated behind the regulator, so it should bleed all the air out the plenum, although it is always best practice to check. Again, I've already done this on this rifle just to save us a little time. The first thing I'm going to do is just take off a few of the bits and pieces to make it a little easier to handle for the camera. The first being the shroud, which simply unscrews. There we have it there. I'll stick this to one side. Next thing I'll remove is the grip. This is obviously a different one from standard. The standard one does have a cover over this little screw, but that's simply removed by just removing the cover plate. With that done, next thing I'll remove is the bottom rail, and that's done by using a 2.5mm Allen key in these 4 screws here. Now as you take the bottom rail off, just be aware that there are 2 sizes of screw in the bottom rail itself. The ones at the back are slightly shorter than the ones at the front. So there the screws are, just in case you get them muddled up. Next thing we'll do is take the butt piece off, and that's done by just removing this thumb screw here. It does have a couple pieces behind it, so just make sure that they don't get lost. Then we can remove the butt pad as one piece. Next up, we'll unscrew the bottle. As you remove the bottle, just make sure that this O-ring here doesn't get lost. And if we needed to remove this steel section from the bottle, we'd first need to locate a nice tight fitting punch. This one is about 5mm, and then simply unscrew it from the bottle. I won't do it all the way, but you can see there is another O-ring between the bottle and this section here. Put this to one side. I will mention that the bottle itself does not have a valve in it, so you can't remove the bottle whilst the rifle is pressurised. Next thing we'll do is remove the barrel. So first thing we need to do is remove the cheek piece, and that's done by using a 2.5mm Allen key in these 2 screws here. With that done, we can put the rifle on its end. Then by using a 3mm Allen key in this grub screw here, one in the middle here, and then one at the front, and then finally using a 4mm one to loosen this grub screw here. Once all are loose, the barrel should just slide out from the block. So there it is there. Stick this to one side. With all those pieces off, we can start concentrating on the rifle itself. The first thing we'll remove is the regulator, and that's this piece here. We're going to do that by using a 16mm ring spanner. There we have the regulator removed from the rifle. With the regulator removed, we can now fully disassemble it. The first thing we're going to do is just pull on this pin here and gently wiggle the regulator piston out from the body. There we have it there. Being nice and careful, as there is a stack of Belleville washers on this little brass piston piece here. You can see the stack of Bellevilles there, and then in my rifle, this particular one has 10 Belleville washers. So we'll remove them, stick them nice and safely to one side. With that done, we can now remove the brass reg piston from this little pin here. Now to do that, what I'm going to be using is a 3BA little spanner, just on those 2 flats there, and then by using a nice little screwdriver, or Allen key I should say, poke that through the hole in the reg piston, then gently loosen them from each other. There we have it there. There's the brass reg piston. This piece here houses the sealing surface for the regulator, and then we have this little pin, which is this piece here, and that also houses the other side of the sealing surface. This one here, this little ramped surface. There we have it there. I will say that if you do have to take this apart, fight the urge to use a set of pliers on this shaft here. Any damage to this shaft and you may stop it sealing from a little O-ring inside the block of the rifle, which we'll remove shortly, but try not to damage this pin in any way. And then finally, from the reg body itself, we can remove the adjuster, which is this little grub screw at the top here. There we have it there. So that's the regulator fully disassembled. Right then, I thought it'd be interesting to some of you to have a little explanation of how exactly this regulator works, as it is slightly different from other designs. So we'll start at the top here with the adjuster screw. This dictates how much pressure we put on our Belleville washers. So Belleville washers in this application are always trying to open the regulator sealing faces. The more pressure we put on these Belleville washers, or the higher the spring tension on the regulator piston, the higher the reg pressure will be. This is because reg pressure is always trying to close the sealing faces. We'll explain a little bit about how that works in a minute. So the further in we go with this screw, the higher our reg pressure will be, and the further out we go, the lower our reg pressure will be. Next up, we'll take a look at these three components here. So we have this little pin at the bottom here, which is 1/2 of the sealing face of the regulator. If we take a close look at it, we can just about see this little chamfered edge. That one there, that seals on this dowel ring, which is a white dowel ring, this little dowel ring seal in here. So I'll put these together quickly. With the regulator all built up, we can see exactly how it works. On this end of the regulator, there is always bottle pressure, and when the regulator is open, like it is now, air is able to flow through the gap between this pin and the little dowel ring sealing face, and into the gap here between the back of the reg piston and this steel surface here. So that's the regulator open, that's the regulator closed. With the regulator closed, air is no longer able to flow through this hole here, so we have a sealed regulator, so this would be ready for the rifle to take a shot. When the rifle takes a shot, the air between this gap here decreases, allowing the Belleville washers to force the piston open, and then the cycle continues. At this stage here, air is able to flow through, close the reg piston, and we're ready for a shot again. Hopefully that makes sense. It is a rather simple design, but one I really quite like. I will say that an advantage of this style of regulator here is that we're not adjusting the sealing faces in order to adjust the reg pressure. We do that by adjusting this screw here, so we're leaving the sealing faces alone. If we look at something like an FX amp reg, the two sealing faces are pressed up against each other, and to increase the reg pressure, we have to rotate the adjuster screw anti-clockwise in order to increase the reg pressure. So what you're in effect doing is rubbing two sealing faces against each other, which isn't ideal. Right, I'll stick the regulator to one side and we'll start work on the rest of the rifle. Before we put the regulator away, the last thing I want to show you is just a nice close-up on the valve pin, or the regulator pin I should say, itself. So it's fairly nicely machined, with the sealing face there, not a mirror finish by any stretch of the imagination, but a nice fine turned finish. There we have it. Well, you won't see the sealing face as it is white dowel ring, but under our microscope or our little loop, you can see that the actual face that the pin seals against is a fine finish as well. So I just wanted to show you a close-up of those two components there. With that done, we can bring back the block of the rifle and continue on with the disassembly. The last thing of the regulator we'll remove is this little brass nut here. That's done by using a 4mm Allen key. Beneath this there's a small O-ring which we can tap out of the block. So there it is there. Next up, I'm just going to remove some bits and pieces, starting with these two Picatinny rails here. That's done using a 2.5mm Allen key. Same on the other side. Using an adjustable spanner, I'm going to remove the gauge, cracking it loose, then doing the rest by hand. There is an O-ring on the back of the gauge, so just make sure that doesn't get lost if you do end up taking them off. Do the same on the back side here. Next up, we'll remove the trigger and the trigger unit from the rifle. So first thing we'll do is upend the rifle and remove this screw here. That's done by using a 2.5mm Allen key. Once the screw is loose, we can gently pull up this plastic cover piece here and expose the trigger linkage. Next thing we'll do is loosen and remove these 4 screws here, 2 on either side. Again, using a 2.5mm Allen key. Next, we'll slide the trigger unit down, and then by using a nice wide flat-bladed screwdriver, we'll pop this linkage off here. A little difficult to show on camera, but to do that, you just get the flat-bladed screwdriver between the linkage, then gently pry it apart. With the trigger removed, we'll disassemble that a little more now. First, we'll remove the safety blade by using a T10 Torx bit in the screw in the side. Here we have it there. Before we push this rod out, what we will have to do is just remove the ball detent from the side, and we do that by using a 2.5mm Allen key in this grub screw here. Beneath this there will be a spring and a ball bearing which we can gently tap out. So those 2 pieces there, very small spring and a little ball bearing. Once that's done, we can push the safety rod out and it comes out as 1 piece there. With that done, that's as far as I'm going to take the trigger unit. We could bang this pin out if we needed to remove the trigger blade itself. However, I'm not going to bother for this video. We will take just a close look at it here. We see the trigger tension or the trigger weight dictated by this spring here, which is adjustable by this collar here. So bringing the gun back, and the next thing we'll do is remove this black plastic cover piece off from the top. It's done by using a T10 Torx bit in these 2 screws here. Next up, we'll remove the scope rail, and that's done by loosening these 2 screws here using a 3mm Allen key. With that done, I am just going to remove the grub screws for the barrel, which we took out earlier, although we didn't remove the grub screws entirely. Next up, we're going to remove the cocking arm. So to do that, we use a 2.5mm Allen key in the screw in the side here. With that removed, we'll dislodge the arm, then gently pull the arm from the pin itself. Next thing we'll do is just remove these 2 side cover pieces. So the one on the side here. That's done using a T10 Torx bit. Next, we'll very gently lay the rifle down on its side and remove this cover piece here by using a T10 Torx bit in these 4 bolts here. Next thing we'll do is by using a tape, we'll make a note of this rod length here. So the distance between this face here and the back of the rod. So on my rifle it is just under 23 centimeters, so I've made a note of that. Next thing we'll do is by using a T10 Torx bit, we'll loosen this screw in the side here. And this screw itself is unique on the gun as it is a longer version of the other ones fitted to the rifle. With that done, we can very gently rotate the rod round to dislodge this part here. Then picking up the block, we can rotate that gently round to one side and then pull out this rod here. First thing we have to do though is just gently unhook that piece there. So if we look at the back here, this piece just pulls out. Then we can remove this piece here. And then if we needed to, we could remove this rod here by just simply unscrewing it. However, I'm going to be leaving mine intact. With that done, we can remove the 2 halves of the block here from each other, although just as a precaution, I will take the measurement between this block here and this block here. And on my rifle, it's just over 14.5 centimeters. So there's the front half of the block there. This piece here is removable if you needed to remove it. You'd simply quite need to unscrew it from the block itself. It is fairly tight though, so I'm going to be leaving my one intact. I will, however, be taking out this O-ring here, which acts as the buffer for the cocking arm. The only other removable part of the front block is this screw in the base here, which houses an O-ring. If you needed to remove that, you'd quite simply need to use a T10 Torx bit and unscrew it. However, I'm going to be leaving my one in. So there we have it. We'll stick this to one side and carry on with the back half of the rifle. So first thing we'll do is continue unscrewing the plenum tube. And again, we could remove this boss here, although it is fairly tight in the block itself. But there we have the plenum. It does have a little bit of laser engraving on the side, and we will be making a plenum plug for this rifle to go in here to use up a little bit of that 60cc plenum. There we go, 60cc's there. Next thing we'll do is remove these two blocks from each other. And to do that, we'll just remove this screw here by using a 2.5mm Allen key. Same on the other side, and then the two blocks can be separated. Next thing we'll do is remove the valve itself. First though, I will say that there is an O-ring in this boss here, so hopefully the camera will pick that up, but there is an O-ring in the hole there, and we're going to remove that by just using a plastic O-ring pick. So there's the O-ring. We'll stick that nice and safely to one side. To remove the valve from this block here, what we're going to do is use an adjustable spanner and remove this nut here. So the nut itself does have two flats on it. Be nice and careful and undo the nut. We have it there. Next thing we'll do is pull out the valve. So this is normally quite tight in here, although it does come out if you give it a little tug. The valve itself is externally adjustable by adjusting this back piece here. So you can stick a Allen key or something nice and thin through these holes and adjust the tension on the valve return spring when the rifle is built up and pressurized. But next thing we'll do is take a measurement from the top of the adjuster here to the base of the aluminium part. And on my rifle, it's around 24.4, 24.5, roughly in that area. We'll use that measurement to reset the valve to a rough position at a later date when we do the reassembly. But unscrewing it, we can remove this piece here. It does have an O-ring around this shaft here. And then we can remove the valve pin and the valve return spring. There we have it there. So that's the valve housing pretty much fully disassembled. We could, if we wanted to, knock these pins out and remove the trigger sears, however I'm not going to bother. So we can stick this to one side and bring back the back half of the rifle. On this side what we'll do is remove the hammer spring adjuster. First we need to loosen this lock screw here. With that done, we can remove the hammer spring adjuster by using a 5mm Allen key and undo this screw here. Can then tip out the hammer spring and then remove the hammer from the rifle. There we have it there. If we wanted to, we could remove this arm here by loosening and removing this screw here, but I believe it's probably Loctite from the factory and I'm going to leave it where it is. Next thing we'll do is remove this cover piece from the back by using a T10 Torx bit and loosening and removing these two screws here. And with that done, we can slide the pellet probe out the back. I believe on these rifles that all the back halves of the pellet probe are the same, although this shaft here is caliber specific. With that done, that's pretty much the entire rifle disassembled. There are still one or two more things we can take off of it, such as the trigger sears, which we're not going to be doing in this video, but we also do have a couple detents at the top here. This one is just for the pellet probe to give it a little bit of resistance as we move it backwards and forwards. And if we look in this hole here, we see a spring and a ball, which acts as the magazine detent, both of which we're going to be leaving where they are for now, although if you wanted to remove them, they are fairly simple. This one is removed using a 2.5mm Allen key, which exposes this piece of sprung steel here with the ball bearing just tucked nicely underneath it. The other thing we could remove or adjust is the magazine detent, this ball here. That's done by loosening or removing this screw here using a 2.5mm Allen key. The last thing that I will mention is that this rifle does come with a restrictor port put into the transfer port. So by using a 4mm Allen key, we can come in here and remove the restrictor port from the rifle itself. I'm not going to be putting this back into my rifle. I may have to make a slightly different part, but we won't be putting the restrictor back in the rifle. But I just wanted to remove it to show you. So it's in that hole there if you wanted to remove it or inspect it for any reason. There we have it there. With that all said and done, that's the rifle fully disassembled. Right then, with the disassembly of the rifle complete and successful, I thought what we'd do now is to give you a little overview of what we plan to do with the rifle. So firstly, we plan to make a telescope and shroud for the rifle so that we can get it in the standard Krait box, but when we start shooting it, we can give the shroud a little tug and pull it out to extend it a little. Next up, we want to have a little rebalance of the rifle and see if we can tune it a little better. The rifle itself now is running about 65 bar, or it was before I took it apart, and I want to increase that a little to around 85, 90. That's typically where regulators like to be. At 85 or 90, the shot cycle should be nice and crisp. The actual rifle itself should be nice and efficient. We might lose some shots as we are obviously jumping the reg pressure up, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. And with a higher reg pressure, we might even get the rifle a little more accurate. Although, to be fair to it, it is plenty accurate at the moment. Up in the reg pressure may cause us some problems, so what we are going to have to do is make a plug for the plenum, and that will help cut down on a little bit of the valve ping as well. This rifle is nowhere near as bad as the Eurogain 2, but after shooting it for all of Saturday yesterday, we did notice a little bit of ping resonating from the plenum. Obviously, we're going to have gauge covers, cocking handles, and all sorts of different little bits and pieces. Right then, so that's the plans for the rifle itself. The last thing we'll do is just give you a few comments on the rifle in general. So I'm really quite happy with how the rifle was built. I can't really see any areas that are majorly disappointing or anything like that. The rifle is fairly solid and stable. You can't change the point of impact by pulling the rifle into you or trying to bend the rifle in any way, so that's a good thing. That means the rifle chassis is nice and secure. I have no major complaints about how the rifle's built. The only part of the rifle that I was concerned about before I bought it was the regulator itself. On Facebook and some of the forums you will see some complaints about the regulator, and I'm not sure if that was earlier versions, but I can safely say that my rifle with this regulator, which is supposedly the newest design with just the Mark II housing, has no issues whatsoever. It didn't creep, there was no major machining issues in it, and the regulator is nice and presentable. There was no debris, no bad machining or anything like that, so possibly I was either lucky or they've sorted the regulators out now. With that all said and done, that's pretty much it for the Krait. I'm really quite happy with the rifle itself, and I really can find no major complaints with it. Maybe a little bit of complaints can be levied at one or two of the components inside the rifle. They do suffer from a little bit of marring, where someone at the factories put it together and just used sort of regular pliers on this, I think, to turn it to get it into the right orientation, although the marks themselves do have no bearing on the performance of the rifle. They are a little annoying to see, but apart from one or two little marks and things, I'm really happy with the rifle. Right then, that's about going to do it for this video. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.